Oh,
Good day, everyone, and welcome to our virtual museum tour. Today, we are going to walk through the story of Dr. Jose Rizal's life in Brussels, Belgium. During the year 1890, this is sometimes referred to as part of his second homecoming, because even though he was living abroad, his thoughts and worries were already pulling him back to the Philippines. Brussels was more than just a stopover in Rizal's travels. It became a place of hardship, love, sacrifice, and productivity. While staying here, Rizal balanced many roles. He was a son worried for his family, a reformist writing essays and articles, and a patriot preparing himself for the possibility of returning home despite the dangers. Throughout this tour, you will notice several markers. These represent the photos you can see in our virtual museum. Each of them is directly tied to Rizal's story and help us visualize the events. Let's now begin our journey in Brussels. So, in the late 1889 or early 1890, Brussels, Belgium, in which he arrived in January 28, 1890, um, and in late 1889 and early 1890, Rizal made a big decision. He left Paris, the famous city of lights, and moved to Brussels, Belgium. Here, we can see the picture of Brussels in Belgium, calmer, quieter, and very different from the busy life of Paris. The reason was simple, but also very important. Paris had become too expensive for him, and the lively social life of the city made it hard for him to concentrate on his writing. Rizal realized that if he stayed there, he would be distracted and spend money he did not have, two things that could keep him from finishing the work he considered most important. Rizal was on a mission. He wanted to complete El Filibusterismo, the sequel to Noli Me Tangere. Through this book, he hoped to open the eyes of his fellow Filipinos and expose the injustice and abuses happening in their homeland. He knew that every page, every chapter, was part of a larger fight to reform and freedom. The place of focus was Brussels. Unlike Paris, Brussels was simpler, more affordable, and calmer. It gave Rizal the peace of mind he needed to concentrate on his mission. His decision to move showed not just practicality, but also his discipline and determination. He was willing to sacrifice comfort, luxury, and the excitement of the Parisian life for a greater purpose, the freedom, dignity, and future of his people. So in the next picture, you will able to see Susan Jacobi. Well, when Rizal moved to Brussels, he chose to stay at 38 Rue Philippe de Champagne, a modest boarding house managed by two sisters, Susan and Marie Jacobi. The boarding house was simple, but it became Rizal's safe and quiet place during his stay. Unlike the grand lifestyle of Paris, this home offered him the peace and modest living conditions he needed to focus on his work. So as you can see in this picture, you can see Susan Jacobi. He was kind, warm, and greatly admired by Rizal during his stay in their home. It was here that Rizal met Susan Jacobi. He was born on July 17, 1845, in Asselborn, Cornwall, in the Grand Duchy of Luxembourg. By the time Rizal arrived, Suzanne was already 45 years old and had settled in Belgium with her sister. During his stay, Rizal and Suzanne developed a close friendship. Suzanne admired Rizal greatly, not only for his intelligence and charm, but also for his kindness and sense of purpose. Over time, her admiration grew into deep affection, cared for him, and according to accounts, she fell in love with the Filipino doctor. Rizal, however, did not pursue a romantic relationship. He remained gentle and respectful toward Suzanne, but his heart and mind were firmly set on a different mission. He was in Brussels for one main reason: to continue his writing, especially El Filibusterismo. He knew that his work could inspire his fellow Filipinos and expose the injustices of Spanish rule. Because of this, he chose discipline over personal attachment, always putting the future of his people first. So even after Rizal left Brussels, Suzanne did not forget him. Letters written to him later revealed her longing and affection. In one of her messages, she expressed how much she missed him and wished he would return. These heartfelt words showed that Rizal, even while in exile, left a strong mark not only through his writings, but also in the lives of the people who came to know him personally. The story of San Jacobi reminds us that Rizal was not just a hero, but also a man, someone who inspired love and admiration whenever he went. Yet, it also shows his unwavering dedication, even when faced with affection and companionship. Rizal chose to sacrifice personal happiness in order to remain faithful to his mission for the Philippines. So, in the next picture, as you can see here, is the historical plaque at Rue de Philippe de Champagne. So, here we go to 38 Rue Philippe de Champagne in Brussels, where a historical plaque now marks the Jacobi boarding house where Jose Rizal stayed in 1890. This place, though modest, became his home while he was working on one of the most important tasks of his life: completion of El Filibusterismo. So during his stay here, Rizal was accompanied by Jose Albert, an old student companion from Paris. So the two shared lodgings in the Belgian capital, supporting one while far from home. Later on, Albert left Brussels, and another Filipino student, Jose Alejandro, replaced him. Alejandro continued to stay with Rizal and witness his dedication as he worked day and night on the chapters of his novels. So even though Rizal tried to focus on his writings in Brussels, troubling news from the Philippines never stopped reaching him. From his family in Calamba, he learned that the Dominican hacienda has once again raised rents to unbearable levels. The tenants, many of whom had already been struggling, now faced harsher conditions than before. So Rizal's own family was among those who suffered the most. They were harassed, threatened, and persecuted for resisting the unfair demands. The situation grew worse when some of his relatives were deported from their own lands, stripped not only of their livelihood, but also of their dignity. Well, for Rizal, this was heartbreaking. He was thousands of miles away in a quiet room in Brussels, working tirelessly on El Filibusterismo, a novel meant to expose such abuses. Yet, at the same time, his loved ones were living through the very injustice he was writing about. Imagine his frustration, wanting to stand beside his family to fight for them, but being stuck in another continent with only his pen as his weapon. Still, the pain of distance never left him. The more news he received, the stronger his desire grew to return to the Philippines, even if it meant facing danger. For Rizal, the fight for justice was no longer just a duty to his countrymen. It was also personal, tied to the suffering of his own family. So in the next artworks, we can see here is that we can see La Solidaridad, the official newspaper of the propaganda movement. It was founded on February 15, 1889 in Barcelona by Graciano Lopez Haina, one of Rizal's compatriots in the fight for reforms. The paper was published every 2 weeks or fortnightly and quickly became the lifetime of Filipinos in Europe who were determined to bring change to their homeland. This newspaper was not just a collection of articles, it was the united voice of the Filipino reformists In its pages, they debated, defended, and demanded reforms such as representation in the Spanish Cortes, equal rights under the law, and an end to the abuses committed by friars and officials. Every issue was eagerly read and secretly circulated among Filipinos in Europe and the Philippines. So despite the heartbreaking news from Calamba, Rizal devoted himself to writing for Lazo from February to July 1890. He contributed some of his most powerful essays. Through them, he defended the dignity of Filipinos, exposed corruption and injustice, and reminded Spain of its moral obligation to treat the Philippines fairly. So, one of the articles by Rizal in the La Solidaridad, well, of his most important works were A la Defensa, or To the Defense, in which Rizal boldly answered anti-Filipino accusations and exposed the abuses of the friars. And one of which was La Verdad para Todos, or The Truth for All. He defended Filipinos from claims that they were ignorant, reminding Spain that education and opportunity had been deliberately withheld. And one of which was Vicente Barante's Teatro Tagalog, or Barantes, the Tagalog Theater, a critique that dismantled false Spanish views about Tagalog drama and culture. And another one, Una Profanacion, or A Desecration, a deeply personal piece where Rizal condemned the friars who denied Christian burial to his brother-in-law, Mariano Herbosa, simply because he was connected to Rizal's family. And one of which was Verdades Nuevas, or New Truths, a rebuttal against pro-fire arguments that attempted to justify oppression.
Next is the crueldad or cruelty, a defense of his dear friend Ferdinand Blumentritt, who was attacked and maligned in Spanish writings. The next one is differentias or difference. Rizal's reply to biased Spanish articles that distorted the truth about the Philippines. Next is inconsuencias or inconsistencies is a defense of another Filipino reformist, Antonio Luna, who had been unfairly attacked in the Spanish press. The next article is Lanto wa y Risas or Tears and Laughter. A moving condemnation of racial prejudice that strip Filipinos of dignity. The next one is Ingratitude. This is the article in which Rizal's sharp response to insults heard by Governor General Weyler against Filipinos. And the last one is Sin Nombre or Without a Name. This is a thoughtful essay where Rizal even advocated for a reform in Tagalog spelling, proving that no issue was too small if it could improve the people's lives. Each article struck with precision, combining logic, passion, and courage. Rizal did not write to please, but to wrote that he challenged, to expose, and to inspire. His pen was his sword, and La Solidaridad was his battlefield. The next photo is the people behind the La Solidaridad. Rizal was never alone in his struggle. Alongside him were fellow reformists, Filipino patriots who, despite being far from home, dedicated their talents and courage to that cause of freedom. Together, they formed the backbone of the propaganda movement. Like Rizal, many of them wrote under pen names to protect their identities and to freely express bold ideas without fear of direct retaliation. Jose Rizal himself often signed his work as Di Masalang or Laon-Laan, names that symbolize his readiness to sacrifice for his people. And as you can see in the photo here in our museum, this is the photo of Marcelo H. Del Pilar, one of the strongest voices of the movement, wrote under the name Laridel. His sharp essays powerfully criticized the friars and exposed corruption in the colony. The next photo is the photo of Graciano Lopez Haina, the founder of La Solidaridad, used the pseudonym Diego Laura. He was known for his fiery speeches and satirical writings. The next photo, here, is the photo of Mariano Ponce, another close ally, wrote under several names such as Tikbalang, Naning, and Kali Pulaco, showing his versatility and creativity. The next is the photo of Jose Maria Panganiban, remembered for his intelligence and wit, contributed under the pen name Jomapa. Together, these men form a circle of reformists who believed that the pen was mightier than the sword. Though separated from the Philippines by oceans, their words reached home, stirred the people, and challenged the powerful. Through La Solidaridad, their voices blended into one, calling for justice, dignity, and reform for the Filipino nation. The purpose of this La Solidaridad is it is the official newspaper of the propaganda movement. At first glance, it may look like an ordinary publication, but in truth, it was the very soul and mouthpiece of Filipino reformists abroad. The propaganda movement was the group, but La Solidaridad was the medium that gave life to their ideas. It was the platform that connected young Filipino intellectuals in Europe, that allowed them to debate and collaborate and gave them a unified voice against the abuses of colonial rule. Every issue carried courage, conviction, and a burning hope for change. Its purpose was clear and bold. It is to spread ideas of reform and awaken the Filipino people, to expose abuses committed by friars and corrupt officials, to defend the dignity of Filipinos against racial prejudice, and to call for reforms such as representation of the Spanish Cortes, secularization of parishes, freedom of speech and assembly, and equality under the law. In May 28, 1890, Rizal criticizes gambling in Madrid. On May 28, 1890, Rizal wrote to Marcelo H. del Pilar after hearing trouble news from his friends Juan Luna and Valentin Ventura. They told him that some Filipinos in Madrid were wasting their time gambling instead of focusing on their shared mission. Rizal was deeply disappointed. He reminded them that they were not in Spain to indulge in pleasures, but to dedicate themselves to the fight for reforms and the dignity of the people. For him, every moment spent gambling was a moment stolen from the cause of the nation. At the same time, Rizal was not only focused on politics around this period, he also published an article of the New Orthography of Tagalog, proving that his dedication extended beyond reform struggles. He also cared deeply about the growth of Filipino identity, language, and culture. The situation in Calamba worsened as the Dominican Hacienda once again raised the tents. The tenants, including Rizal's family, were treated harshly and persecuted for resisting the unjust demands. What had started as unfair treatment escalated into outright harassment. The repression grew heavier. Some of Rizal's relatives were deported or banished, separated from their land and livelihood. The people of Palamba live in fear of losing not just their homes but also their dignity. Far away in Brussels, Rizal carried this burden in his heart. He was restless, and how could he continue writing in Europe while his family was suffering back in the Philippines? So every letter from home was like a wound that deepened his desire to return to the Philippines. In July 9, 1890, Rizal opposes Lopez Haina's plan. Around this time, Rizal received news that Graciano Lopezina, the founder of La Solidaridad, was planning to leave Spain and go to Cuba. This worried Rizal deeply. For him, the propaganda movement was already struggling, the resources were limited, and unity was fragile. Losing someone, uh, losing someone as important as Lopezina will weaken their cause even more. Rizal immediately wrote a letter to Mariano Ponce on July 9, 1890, strongly opposing the idea. He urged Lopezina to stay focused on the reformist mission in Spain rather than the distracted by opportunities elsewhere. While in July 1890, Rizal decides to return home. Fast forward to April 30, 1890, essays Cosas de Filipinas y sobre Indolencia de los Filipinos. Around this time, Rizal wrote two essays that struck at the heart of colonial injustice. Through these two essays, Rizal defended the dignity of his people on an intellectual battlefield. He showed that Filipinos were not weak or incapable. They were just victims of an unjust system that needed to change. His words combined both sharp criticism and a vision of hope. Ted, ikaw.
So in May 1, 1891, the letter to Jose Maria Basa resolves this heart to go to Hong Kong. So here you will see a reproduction of a simple yet important letter Rizal wrote to Jose Maria Basa on May 1, 1891. At first glance, it may seem like an ordinary piece of correspondence, but in fact, it reveals a crucial moment in Rizal's journey. At this time, Rizal was living in Brussels, far from home and under constant pressure. He was finishing his novel El Filibusterismo, but he was also burdened by financial struggles and the looming threats of Spanish surveillance. In this letter, he reiterated his wish to go to Hong Kong. For Rizal, Hong Kong represented both safety and opportunity, a place where he could continue his reformist work while also being closer to the Philippines and his family. As you look at this piece, consider how even a short letter can reveal so much about a man's hopes, his struggles, and his vision. It reminds us that history is not just shaped by grand novels or essays, but also by these quieter, personal decisions that guided the path of our national hero. So, on May 30, 1891, Rizal prepares the 20 chapters of the El Filibusterismo for printing. Displayed here is a representation of one of Rizal's greatest literary milestones on May 30, 1891. While living in Brussels, he had already prepared 20 chapters of his novel, El Filibusterismo, for printing. This was no small achievement. The novel, often called El Fili, was the continuation of his earlier work, Noli Me Tangere, but unlike the hopeful spirit of the Noli, this second book was darker, sharper, and far more revolutionary. By this time, Rizal had grown disillusioned with the slow pace of reform. His experiences abroad and his constant awareness of the injustices in the Philippines filled these pages with urgency and anger. So on June 5, 1891, Rizal leaves Brussels for Ghent. Here, we focus on another decisive movement in Rizal's journey. So on June 5, 1891, Rizal departed from Brussels and headed to Ghent, Belgium. At first, it may appear to be just a change of city, but in truth, this move was tied closely to the fate of his second novel, El Filibusterismo. So by this time, Rizal had completed much of his manuscript, but financial difficulties weighed heavily on him. Printing costs in Brussels were too high, and Rizal, who was already supporting his family back in the Philippines, could not afford them. Kent, however, offered a solution: cheaper printing presses and a community where his limited resources could stretch further. So the timeline of Rizal's activities in Kent volume from Vlaanderen to the Philippines. So let us now trace Rizal's life in Ghent, Belgium, the printing and publication capital of the country, and now follow his journey back to Asia. So from July to September 1891, Rizal lived modestly in a small boarding house in Vlaanderen with fellow Filipino Jose Alejandro to save money. They even cooked their own meals. Rizal had chosen the F. Mayer van Loo Press, located on the same street, to print El Filibusterismo, as it offered the lowest quotation and allowed payment by installments. To fund the work, Rizal pawned his jewels and relied on contributions from Jose Maria Basa and 200 pesos from Rodriguez Arias. But these resources quickly ran out, leaving him in financial distress. Okay, so on August 6, 1891, the printing of El Filibusterismo was halted due to lack of funds. Just as the situation seemed hopeless, Rizal's friend, Valentin Ventura, stepped in, sending the money that saved the project. Ventura would be remembered as the savior of El Fili, and on September 18, 1891, El Filibusterismo was published. Rizal immediately sent copies to Hong Kong for Jose Maria Basa and Sixto Lopez. Out of gratitude, he gave the original manuscript, an autographed copy, to Valentin Ventura. Filipino patriots in Barcelona honored him through La Publicidad, praising his novels as a precious jewel of Spanish literature and comparing his style to Alexandre Dumas. So in October 1891, the Madrid newspaper, El Nuevo Regimen, serialized the novel. Copies printed in Kent were shipped to Hong Kong through many confiscated Spanish authorities, making the surviving volumes very expensive. Rizal dedicated the work to the martyred priests Combursa, honoring their sacrifice. But back on September 22, 1891, Rizal sent a copy to Marcelo H. Del Pilar, telling him he would retire from politics, and to Antonio M. Regidor in London. Compared to Noli Me Tangere and El Fili was darker and more revolutionary. Some characters mirrored real individuals such as Padre Florentino, which is fatherless Leoncio Lopez, and then Isagani, which said to be Vicente Ilustre, and Polita Gomez, which was Leonor Rivera. Rizal also began conceptualizing a third satirical novel about Filipino customs, though it remained unfinished along with several other manuscripts like the Macamisa. So going back on October 1891, he returned to Paris on 4B Rue de Chatadon in the ninth arrondissement, but also stayed briefly. He didn't stay long because Paris was expensive. Well, his main purpose was to say goodbye to his close friends, such as Luna and Pardo de Tavera families, and to arrange his personal affairs before leaving Europe for good. He also took the opportunity to prepare his final novel shipments. And on October 1891, from Paris, Rizal made a decisive trip to Madrid. This picture is just a visualization of a trip, but not the exact location. This trip was not a simple social visit. It was for two very serious and very intertwined reasons.
So fast forward to October 18, 1891. After his frustrating experience in Madrid, Rizal traveled to Marseilles, which is a major port in southern France. His purpose was this was his final departure point from Europe, and then he boarded from the steamer SS Melbourne to begin his journey to Asia. As you can see in the next photo, this is the SS Melbourne. Fast forward to the November 20, 1891. After years of struggle and sacrifice in Europe, Rizal finally reached Hong Kong on November 20, 1891. Here, at last, he was reunited with his family after the long period of separation caused by persecution and exile. They settled in Red Nazela Terrace. In the mid-levels is a quiet residential area that provided some measure of stability for the Mercados. In Hong Kong, Rizal also established himself professionally at Aguilar Street in Central. He opened a medical clinic specializing in ophthalmology. As a trained eye doctor, he treated patients from different walks of life, earning both respect and income to support his family. His work demonstrated not only his skill but also his commitment to serving others. Yet Rizal's life in Hong Kong was not only about family and medicine. He continued this mission for reform by drafting the constitution of his new organization, the La Liga Filipina. Through this, he sought to unite Filipinos under shared principle of progress and education and national dignity. Rizal left Hong Kong on SS Don Juan to return the Philippines. His goals were to discuss the Borneo colonization plan with the Governor General to found La Liga Filipina and to demonstrate his loyalty to his homeland. Spanish authorities had already prepared this arrest, sealing his fate upon his return. This timeline in Ghent and Beyan shows not just the path of a traveler, but the sacrifices and decisions of a patriot who carried the weight of his people's futures in his hands. As we reach the end of this tour, uh, now see the collection of images and documents that bring together Rizal's life in Brussels. It is a chapter marked by discipline, sacrifice, and patriotism. So, to summarize this journey, on January 28, 1890, Rizal left Paris and settled in Brussels, seeking a quieter and cheaper place where he could focus on his duty and his writing. He lived at the Jacobi's residence where he met Susan Jacobi, who admired him deeply, though Rizal chose to dedicate his heart to his mission rather than romance. During this time, he also became very active in La Solidaridad, contributing powerful essays that defended Filipinos, exposed abuses, and called for reforms. He also produced key works like Cosas de Filipinas and Sobre la Indolencia de los Filipinos, writing that writings that continue to challenge and inspire us today. Yet even as he worked abroad, he was hunted by the worsening troubles in Calamba. His family's persecution under the Dominican Hacienda and the suffering of fellow Filipinos, these trials pushed him to consider the dangerous decision of returning home. And so, as we close our museum tour of Rizal's and Brussels, may we carry with us the lesson he left behind that true patriotism demands both courage and sacrifice. Here are the random photos found while Rizal was in Brussels. Thank you for joining us on this journey through history. That's all. Thank you.